This is an especially important lecture because this is going to cover what we call Web 2.0 style AJAX client-server interactions. So far what you've learned is it brings you up to about, I would say like 2004 or so, about like the first version of Facebook, so about a dozen years ago. It's where every website, you go to a web page, you visit a URL, and you basically see a static page. And then if you want to go to any other pages, you have to click a link or type another URL, and you go to another page, and you have to hit back on your browser and go back and forth. So today what we're going to introduce is this new sort of interaction, well, relatively new, called AJAX. And the objective today is to be able to run a server-side script. So run a script on the server and fetch all of its results without reloading the current web page. So recall that all that we've done before, which we'll review, is in order to fetch anything from the server, you have to load a new web page or reload the current web page. And that's limiting in a lot of ways because it makes your apps not as interactive. Last time, I'm going to do a brief review last time, which we covered basically how jQuery, this jQuery library, is an elegant way to manipulate the DOM, or the document object model tree, using JavaScript. So I'm going to start today with a quick recap of lecture 6.html. So you can actually pull this up. The code is online. I made a little bit of cleanups and additions to the code, so I want to make sure it's covered before your exam. So, but conceptually, the exact same thing we wrote in class last time. I just added a few new functions. So recall that the web page in lecture 6 from last week was, if you load the web page, there's just this picture you're used to, this truck picture, but then there's 3 buttons down here. So you click the cat button, what it does is that it changes the source of the image to the cat picture. If you click the dog button, it changes to the dog picture, and if you click the bear button, it changes it to the bear picture. So all that's doing is manipulating the DOM to change basically the source attribute of the image. So once again, if we look at let's reload the page again. If we look at inspect element, and this, by the way, should be really easy to run because it's just an HTML web page. You can just load it up in your browser. So if we look at the elements, notice here the main image is source equals truck.jpg. So then when I click the button for cat, pay attention to what happens right down here. When I click cat, this thing changes to cat.jpg. When I click dog, this changes to dog.jpg. And when I click bear, it changes to bear.jpg. Right. And if I reload the page, I haven't actually edited the original web page. So if I reload, it'll still say truck again, because the JavaScript does not modify the file on your computer. It only modifies the DOM tree in the browser's memory. So a quick look at the code. If you actually go from the course web page, you can go to the GitHub repository lecture 6. So a quick look at the code. There's some CSS. There's the jQuery. And recall on the bottom here, there are 3 buttons. So these are 3 button elements in HTML right here. And each one has a unique ID. So ID is just something that's just a unique string. So remember to have each thing have a different ID. So it says cat button, dog button, bear button. And then the last part here is that the image here has an ID as well. And this ID is called main image, and it's set to the truck right now. All right. So when we write JavaScript, what we can do is remember a cat button, dog button, bear button, and main image. So what we can do with JavaScript is recall that our job. So I'm going to zoom back up. We're going to start writing Java. So first we include the jQuery library with the script source. This imports the jQuery library for a lot of convenient functionality and kind of cleans up inconsistencies across web browsers. Once we include this, afterwards you can write JavaScript. So remember this document ready. We put everything inside document ready. So this document ready construct basically means only run this code after the whole document has finished loading. Because if you don't put that, it'll run it as soon as it starts parsing the JavaScript, which means because it's at the top of the file, the rest of the file isn't visible yet. So this is actually really important. So only run the jQuery library guarantees that this function only runs at the very, very end, even though your script is appearing near the top of the file, right? So your script is at the top of the file, but the code inside a document ready only runs at the end after the whole thing has been loaded. So when document ready runs, it'll do a console log, which is a print of hello world, just to make sure it runs. I just added another function here just to show you can do more with it. So this do more initializing function just calls a function which is defined up here. And this just says console.log or print more. So when your document is ready, it should print hello world, and then it should print more. I just want to show you can call a function inside of document ready. It's pretty straightforward. So if I reload the page and go to console, it should say hello world and then more. Right? So that runs when the page completely finishes loading. So now the page is sitting there not doing anything. Right? It doesn't do anything because there's nothing more to run. But the important thing here is that we set these event handlers. So these things run. The cat button, recall this is the selector in jQuery for selecting the cat button. So to select an ID, you put a pound in front of the ID name. So it's called pound cat button or hashtag cat button. So if you write this syntax correctly, this should select the element. This click means when you actually click the cat button, run this function. So notice how the syntax is maybe a little bit weird if you haven't seen JavaScript, is there's a function with no arguments, and it starts with the braces there and ends with this brace there. So this brace matches up this brace. This means that this piece of code should only run when you click the cat button. So if I ask you, when does this code run? It's not when the document is loaded. It's not when the thing is parsed. That only runs when you click the cat button. So it's possible that code to never run if you never click the cat button. Right? So kind of novice mistake is thinking that because the code is here, it runs, all the code runs. In fact, this code does not run. It actually just creates some kind of function object that waits until you click the cat button, and then all the stuff runs. Same thing with dog button. So this is a function here in dog button. And then the bear button, what I show here is that you can just define, there's no reason you need to put the function in there. Yes?
Wait, so is the selector the hashtag or the $?
Okay, so this, let's actually dissect this a bit more. The, let me zoom in. So we can really extremely zoom in. Let's actually zoom in on just this. I can't zoom in anymore. Okay, let's just look at this piece of code right here. So this is, as far as JavaScript knows, this is a string, right? This is just a normal string. You can write anything in here. So the jQuery library, so you could, so you're right. The selector itself, I would say, is this string. And that string is in some kind of syntax that the jQuery library understands. It understands that if you start with a pound, and the rest of the word should be some kind of ID it wants to select. So if you look at the jQuery library, there's all sorts of syntax for what you can select. You can select, elements by all sorts of categories. Yeah, so the selector is a string, and this weird-looking $ parentheses thing around the string, this actually is a function call, which is weird, because the $ is actually the variable name, and the parentheses is how you call functions. All right, so you don't actually need to know this, but jQuery defines this weird variable called a $, and then you can actually call it as a function. So after you call this function, this gives you some object, some jQuery object that represents that button. And then you can call methods on that object like click and other things. Other questions on the selector? This should be in the jQuery readings. Yep.
Why would they use a $sign like that?
Why would they use a $? I mean,
what's the benefit of having it do that kind of like, it just seems really unintuitive.
It just looks weird. Yeah, it does look weird. So if you actually prefer, I think you can write, I don't know the capitalization, I think you can write jQuery parentheses also, or something like that. So the $ is just to make it look short. They didn't want to use a pound because I don't know if it's pound. I don't know if a pound is legal character. Maybe it is, but yeah, they just want to make it short because you're going to write these all the time. So that's just one. That's just a artifact of that. They could have used like underscore. So there's actually a library in JavaScript called underscore, and surprise, surprise, they use underscore dot whatever as their character. But yeah, it's just taking advantage of the fact that you can use non letters as variable names. And just to make it shorter. So you can look in the documentation for all sorts of jQuery stuff. I'm sure you're going to use in your project. But the last one here, the bear button, I want to emphasize that this change to bear is just a variable name. So notice how normally we can define the function inside of the click handler, but you don't have to do that. What you can do instead is, if you want to make your code a little cleaner, is that you can just define a function called change to bear outside and just pass in the name of the function to the click handler. So if you remember change to bear as the function name, and I just defined it out here, function change to bear. So I just gave it a name. So it's the exact same thing. It's as though you plop that thing into there, but it's a little cleaner because it has it as a name. But it does essentially the same thing. So it's the exact same code. Yes?
Would it make a difference when you add parentheses to change there?
Yeah, that's a great. You mean down here? It'd be awesome if I could edit the GitHub webpage. You do it like this, right? So what happens if you do that? That's right, it calls it. So if you actually do that, then the answer is, when does that code run? Is that it actually runs when you, at the very beginning of when it executes. So that's actually a novice mistake. So you should not put the parentheses, because if you put the parentheses, it will call change to bear right here and return. What does actually change to bear return as a function? A lot of things being said. What do you think it returns?
It changes the image and then prints rar.
Okay. Good. It changes image to bear, which is good. So that means if you call change to bear right there, as soon as you load the page, it'll change it to bear. And then it calls rar. And then every function returns a value, right? So what does it return? Yeah, it returns null. It's actually, in JavaScript, it's called undefined. So if you don't have a return statement, in JavaScript function, if you don't have a return statement, it returns this value called undefined, which confusingly is different than null, which is very confusing. But the idea is that if you actually call the function, it will call change to bear right here, and then this is actually click undefined. So this actually doesn't activate the click handler. We should just do this. I don't know why we're talking about it. We can just do it. What are we at? Lecture 6? So if we call, I should always just change the code instead of talking about it. Okay, this one, right? So we're going to call it right now. So this is a common mistake people make when they're not used to passing in functions, because they're like, oh, it's a function, let's just call it. So if we do that, then as soon as the document loads, it will call change to bear right away, because it just sees this code and it just calls it. And then it will actually replace this with undefined, because the code returns undefined. So let's do this. Where's our lecture 6? Okay, so recall that normally it's just a truck. If I reload, it'll call the bear change right away. And now if I click the bear, it shouldn't do anything because it's still a bear. But now if I click cat, it does stuff. Click dog does stuff. But if I click bear, it doesn't actually do anything because it set the click handler to undefined. Make sense? So don't call the function. Okay, so that was it for this for lecture 6. It's the exact same thing we showed last time. Just study this code to kind of see the different ways you can call functions, and the core functionality here is that it does a selector on main image, and it sets the source attribute to the image, to the file you want. Okay, so this, yes.
Sorry, I have to go back to this for a second.
Okay, no worries.
So I get that the problem is that you're not giving it the function, you're giving it what the function returns to it. But I don't get why it would still run it without the condition of the button being clicked.
Oh, okay. So the question was, why would it still run without the button being clicked, right?
It's still within that.
Yeah, it's still within that. Okay, so let's go here. I'm just gonna go to our code. This is the same code. So this one right here, right? So it's still inside of here. Why is it running right when the document loads, right? So the behavior we're observing is that when the document finishes loading, we're actually gonna run change to bear, right?
Yeah.
So why is it doing that? So if I told you, pretend you didn't see this change to bear. If I told you like that, would you believe that this runs before, right when the document loads? The 1, 2, 3, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5?
I know you want me to say yes.
But you still don't believe that it runs and it loads.
I guess, sure, I get it now. But
So the idea is that when your code is being parsed, after being parsed, basically every expression evaluates inside out. So you're going to evaluate everything. You're basically going to evaluate this first, and then get its return value, and then replace it with 15. It's not 15. It's whatever, and then you're gonna call it. So everything happens inside out. So in a language, if you use languages with what's called lazy evaluation, you can actually have different behavior. So there are languages for which that thing is not evaluated right away. So if you're all interested in programming language classes, there are languages where it behaves like what you want. But in JavaScript and most mainstream languages, it will run this as soon as it sees it. Right. So if you do this, it does run this code, and this code evaluates to the function itself. So then you can pass the function in. Cool. Other questions on this code before I move on? Okay. So this JavaScript, we introduced JavaScript last week because we needed a way of changing the web page after it's been loaded. Right. Without JavaScript, we just have a truck picture. I have to fix it. I gotta save it. We just have a truck picture and then we'd be done. So we need some JavaScript to manipulate the web page. But the thing is, this actually is not this code only just changes the image source on the web page. It's not actually going and fetching any new data from the server. The image, it does force the browser to go load the image, but it's not actually, say, fetching data from a database or other sorts of data from the server. So today what we want to do is we want to create an app like the following. So I'm just going to, this is the template. This is the template. This is what we're going to build up toward. So what I want to do is recall last time we had the 3 users in the database, right? There's Philip, John, Jane, and we each had a different age and a profile picture. What I want is, what I want to be able to do is create a page like this, and I can type in my name. And when I hit get profile, what it'll do is it'll actually go to the server, look myself up in the database, look up my name, my age, and my profile picture, and actually display in the web page. And notice how the web page never reloaded. There's a small delay because I have to go to the server. So if I go to hit John, it will actually fetch John's data from the database. If I hit Jane, it'll fetch Jane's data from the database. So that's what we're going to build up towards today. And the big difference between this and what we've had before is before, remember, we needed a form. And when I don't have the old one popped up, but when you hit get profile, it actually brings you, it reloads a page and brings you to a new page where it's Jane's profile or John's profile, Philip's profile, or so on. So to review the kind of Web 1.0 stuff we've seen so far. So this is here. So this is kind of the main part we're reviewing. So Web 1.0, which is called non-Ajax, and Web 2.0 is called Ajax. So you're all gonna be tired of seeing this picture by now, but in Web 1.0, which is all we've studied so far, is we have a browser here, there's the server, and we make one request, one HTTP request. The server does something, returns that to us through HTTP, and this data that it's returning is an entire HTML web page. And then we load up this web page here. And then in the web page, if we click on a form or click on a link or click on anything, we will make another HTTP request to the server. It'll do some more work, and it'll return us a new HTML web page, which we reload in our browser. And then if you want to do it again, you do it again. And then if you want to click the back button, for the most part it works. If you click the back button, you go to the previous page, you visit and stuff. So this is what most kind of basic websites you see do, right? So if you visit the CS department website, every page is just one thing, and you click, courses, and it loads another web page, and you click events, clicks another web page, click, people listing, another web page. So the thing is that using this system, you can't make something like this, right? So there's no way to make an app like Google Maps, which is the canonical example here. So you can't make an app like Google Maps like this, because notice what Google Maps says. So the first load is fine, right? This looks like Web 1.0. I make a request and I load a web page. But then what I can do is I can do this, right? I can start dragging, and notice how new data starts getting loaded from the server. I can zoom in, and more data gets loaded. Well, that was not a very exciting region to zoom in on, but if you zoom in on that, let's actually look at oh, this is actually really neat. So you can actually have so much detail in Manhattan. So let's see. So you can zoom in. Is there a 3D view too? That would be great. Yeah, there's buildings, there's everything. So this clearly is not just happening in the browser, right? As you zoom, we're clearly fetching more data from Google servers, because I can't possibly have saved all this in my browser already, right? I mean, I can't possibly know where I'm zooming. So, I mean, you can actually look. Do you know you can look inside of buildings? If you go, I don't know which malls have it, but there are some malls that if you zoom in enough, you actually see the malls and you see the floors and stuff. It's pretty impressive. And then there's street view and everything, right? So this requires something different, because notice how I'm not reloading the web page at all. It doesn't feel like I'm refreshing the web page. The URL is kind of changing, if you notice, because the Google site changes the URL dynamically just so you can bookmark the latitude, longitude coordinates. But really, it's the same web page, right? If this was a different web page, you would see the browser flicker and refresh the whole page. So this clearly requires a different kind of technology than we've learned so far. So what we learned so far, there's no way to build something like this. There's actually one way to build it, is to load the whole world into your computer and then just use JavaScript. That's clearly impractical. So the Web 2.0 model, which you've been reading about, changes the picture in the following way. So let's actually do this 2.0 here. The first time you go to the web page, it does the exact same thing as the Web 1.0 model, pretty much. The first visit you do makes a request, and then does some processing, and it gives you back a full HTML web page, right? That's like initially you load Google Maps, you have the whole web page. But then what you can do is as I start dragging around on my map or zooming in or out or whatever, I have a bit of JavaScript code that runs in my web browser. And the JavaScript code knows where I'm zooming into and moving around, because when I interact with the browser, it's all through JavaScript. So JavaScript knows my coordinates, how zoomed out or in I am. And the JavaScript code knows what new map tiles I want the server to fetch. So this JavaScript code in the browser, or the JavaScript in the browser, knows that when I go this way, I need to fetch those tiles on the left, right? When I go this way, I need to fetch all these tiles. When I go down, I need to fetch these tiles. So then what it does, I can emulate a slow connection, but what it does is, actually, let's try this. Whoa, it hijacked my right click button. That's terrible. Okay, whatever. So what it does is that JavaScript knows to queue up and say, I want map tiles, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever the tiles are. So then what it does is it makes a request. Again, everything is through HTTP. Now what the server does is it just sends back a little bit of data. So it just sends back data, more data. And then the JavaScript itself takes the data and plops it on the web page without the browser ever reloading the page. So that's the Web 2.0, or commonly called AJAX model of interaction, is that JavaScript itself goes and asks the server, and the server has written anything you want. The server responds to that by not sending a full web page. It doesn't send a full web page. It just sends chunks of data, and it sends chunks of data back to the JavaScript code, and it's up to the JavaScript code to put it in the web browser. So there's no page reload here. The JavaScript can keep asking for data, and it just streams more data into the browser, and the browser address bar can technically stay the same because the page has not reloaded itself. Yes?
So what's the difference between AJAX and just like a really good use of JavaScript?
What's the difference between AJAX and a really good use of JavaScript? Good. So the difference is, so what we showed last time, if you extrapolate and make it more fancy, is there's no way for the JavaScript to go query anything on the server yet, right? The JavaScript can do anything at once to the DOM tree. So the best use of JavaScript, you can make Angry Birds or whatever game you want in the web browser itself. You can put images in, you can put sounds in, you can do stuff, but you can't go to the server and ask for more data. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yep.
So the data goes from the server to the browsers. Does those data that the browser doesn't use anymore, does the browser delete them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what happens is the data that doesn't need anymore. So all of this happens, is sent into the browser's RAM, right, or the computer's memory. So if you exit the browser, it's all gone, right? But if your browser doesn't need it, it just depends on what the JavaScript wants to do with it. So So what happens is, imagine as you collect the data, you put it in a list, right? Like just every time the data comes in, you add it to a list. Then that list will just keep growing, and you're just going to keep using up more memory. So it's up to you to delete the data from the list. And if you delete the data from the list, the JavaScript garbage collector will sweep it away. But yeah, so that's what's called a memory leak in JavaScript. So if you keep collecting the data and you don't delete it yourself, then your browser memory usage can just go through the roof. It's up to the programmer writing the JavaScript code. Yeah, there's no automatic way to deal with that, because the browser doesn't know what you want to keep or what you don't. But if you don't keep the data, then it will delete it eventually. Yeah, you have a question out there? Okay, so this is the central picture behind everything. So then the rest of the lecture, we're going to make this concrete. So what does this JavaScript code do? What does the server do? And then what is this data that it's sending back? Right. So we're going to make all this concrete. And if we do this properly, then you'll be able to extrapolate and show how, as I scroll through this, JavaScript is running, calling the server is fetching data, it's coming back to JavaScript, and JavaScript is putting it on the screen without ever loading the web page. And this is how a modern web application would work. So anything that you're using, Gmail, Google Maps, booking flights or something where you can choose options and stuff, reappears on the screen without reloading. It's using this Web 2.0 or AJAX type of technology. Okay, so we actually now want to make things concrete and spend time writing through the code to do this. So remember, the end goal here is to make something like this, where I can query for data from the database. and fetch it back. So I'm just going to start with a blank canvas right here. There's actually not too much code in HTML to write. Again, all this will be online afterwards and runnable. So let's go to lecture 7. Lecture 7. Okay, so this is just a blank web page that I created. I put in jQuery. So there's a title, Web 2.0 demo. I put in jQuery, and I put in JavaScript, and I put a document ready function. So this is a good kind of skeleton hello world code. So this hello world will run after the whole page finishes loading. I just have a welcome in here, so if I save it, it's always good to always reload just to make sure you're saving it. So if I reload lecture 7, I just print hello world. Okay, so what I want to add to this now is I want to add just a box. So I'm going to say P for new paragraph. I'm just going to say name, colon, and then input ID equals name box, type equals text. This should be from one of the prior lectures. Let me zoom out on this a little bit. Remember, again, spaces don't matter, so you can indent however much you like. Button ID equals lookup button, get profile. Okay, so I've added a name thing, this input text box, and then a button. So this one is called name box, and this one is called lookup button. So remember, every element in HTML can have an ID on it, and we're going to use this ID in our JavaScript code to refer to those elements. Because if we don't have an ID, we can't say what we're talking about. So this should display name, a box, and a button. And because the new lines don't matter, it's all going to just display on one line. Because it doesn't matter if I did this or I put in a new line. So I'm going to save. Okay, so that makes sense. So there's a name, there's a box where you put stuff in, and there's a get profile. Okay, so then what we want to do is we want to put some things down here where we can put data. So we're going to say, let's do div ID equals div your name, div ID equals your age, image ID equals profile image, source equals truck.jpg. Okay, so let's parse this. So a div is basically, it's pretty similar to a paragraph in JavaScript. So this div structure is basically just a chunk of stuff where you can put text or other content in, which is they just need to call it something. And then I call this ID name div, age div, and the image, this is the image tag that we're used to. So this is called profile image, and then I start loading with the truck, and style equals means I put CSS. This is CSS I write inside of the image itself. So you can write CSS on the top of the file, or you can throw it in each element if you want. So I just basically make the image 300 wide, so I don't want it to be too giant. So if I load this, if I save and reload this page, what I should get is this kind of blank your name, your age thing below. Just to emphasize, this is just this is not actually your name. I'm just going to put the brackets. Reload. Okay, so this is what's being displayed on right now. It's just it just has some kind of a paragraph-like thing called a div that displays the words your name, your age, and then it displays the truck picture like you're used to. So that's what we're going to start with. And the reason why I want to do this is we need to fetch some data from the server and then put it in your name, your age, and replace this image with the one that we want. We need somewhere to put it. We could have started these out as blanks. Oftentimes people do this, so when you start the page, it'll look ugly if you load the web page and it just says your name, your age, because it just kind of looks ugly. You can start it blank if you want, right? You can just put nothing in there. If you put nothing in there, then those divs will be empty and they won't be displayed. It'll look like that. But I just put something in there just so you can see that there's something here already, right? That it doesn't really matter what's inside, because if it's invisible, you can't obviously see it on the page. Okay, so any questions so far on this? Is just HTML. I haven't set up any JavaScript at all. So if you visit this web page, you're going to get this. If you're on my computer and visit this web page, you're just going to get welcome and a thing. So what happens when I click the button? Nothing, because I haven't written any JavaScript, right? Buttons themselves don't do anything. So I can click all I want. It doesn't do anything. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is add a click handler to this button, right? So we want to, when I click this button, we want to take the name someone put in here and then use that name to look up stuff on the server. All right, so the first thing we do a button handler. So we go here. So this is the HTML. So we're going to put the JavaScript up here inside of document ready. So we're going to do the syntax, the jQuery $. What was the button called? It was called a lookup button. So remembering variable names is half the challenge. So if you write this wrong, it's not going to select anything. Click, function. So it's good to test everything one step at a time. So I'm just going to write console.log, clicked, like that. All right, so when you click the button now, it should say clicked. It's often good practice to just do console logs and write one or a few lines at a time. Because if I try to write the whole thing and it doesn't work, I don't know where to debug. So if this works, I know at least the button handler was spelled right. So if I reload and I say get profile, it should say, the console is too small. It should say clicked. If I can clear the console, I can say clicked. And the more times I thing, it just counts up. It's just a way, instead of printing clicked 100 times, it just counts it up. But it's being clicked, which is good. So the next thing we want to do is to grab the value out of this box, right? So once we click, we need to get whatever we wrote in that box so that we can use it as a variable, as a value for something. So the way to do that in jQuery is first we need to select the box. So the box is called, recall that this is just JavaScript. So this is another good way to debug, is that you can just start writing JavaScript down here, and it'll run the JavaScript in your page because it's just JavaScript. So this button, this box is called nameBox. So if if I do this right and I press enter, notice how this returns the actual box object. So if you notice, if I highlight over it, it actually shows that this is the box it corresponds to up here. So that's a really nice thing about debugging or writing your JavaScript code in the console, because then for things like jQuery, when it actually returns stuff, you can actually highlight over it. It's not just like printing to your console or your terminal. You can actually highlight and see what's referring to. So that's actually the right box. If this was the wrong box, then I would be able to tell, because when I highlight it, it looked like some other box somewhere. So that's the box we're selecting. So we know that code works. So now we want to do, I think the function is called val, V-A-L. There we go. So that's the method for getting the value out of these sorts of boxes. So all this is in jQuery documentation, or you can look up on Stack Overflow, but there's some way to get the value out. It's usually called val for a lot of these things. So again, this selects the box itself, .val with the parentheses. So you have to call it, right? If you don't call it, it just gives you the function object. So you have to call it. And when you call it, it will return as a string the current value in the box. So just to show that there's no magic here. Whoa, what just happened? I'm going to call it again. And notice how it returns the hello, hello string. If I change this string to goodbye, I don't have to save it or anything, right? I just change the string and I'm down here and I do val and it'll say goodbye, right? So this, when you call this method, it will give you whatever string is currently in the box. Does that make sense? Yes?
So this one, we do call it, that's why it's in parentheses at the back.
Yeah, so this, you mean the val method, right? This val, right? Yeah, so if you don't call it, this gives you a function object, because something.val is a method, or it's actually a function. It's a bunch of code. So you need to actually call that code, and this is why it's great to have a console, because you can try it. So if you don't call it, it just returns you some function. That's actually some jQuery function in some encoded minimized form. And if you call it, it doesn't need any arguments. If you call it, it will actually return goodbye. So what happens if I call this function with an argument? Like, what if I call it with a string argument? You don't actually need to know this, but it's always good to try. So what behavior might be good for that? If I call val with an argument.
Input.
Yeah, it might. It might. I don't know if it does, but it might actually just change it. And it actually does, which is cool. So if you notice, if I call the same val function with, let's put a bunch of smileys. So if I call the val function and I actually pass in a string to the val function, it'll actually change the value. So it actually sets the value. So this val function in JavaScript, in jQuery, does two things. If you call it with nothing, it'll grab you the value. If you call it with something, look up there, and it'll actually change the value. So that's another way of playing around JavaScript. So up to your question up there, this is still no AJAX. So this is still just playing with JavaScript on the browser. So again, what we want is, if we call it with no arguments, it will return the current thing out, the current string. So that's what we want. We want to return the current string. So we can just copy and paste this code. Control C, Control V. Let's copy and paste in here, and let's just name it, assign to something. Let's call it, what do I call it in my code? I called it name to lookup. I'm purposely putting variable ins a little longer just to make it clear, but you can have short ones if you want. So then we do console.log name to lookup. Ooh, gotta spell it right. So in JavaScript, you define local variables with this var keyword. So this is a local variable. So when you say var something, this could be any word you want. It declares a new local variable. So in Java, it's string name to lookup or int or whatever. JavaScript, you just say var, and then you assign it to whatever string this returns. And when I do console.log, I should print out the name to lookup now. Right? So if I just save and confirm we have this, save, and again, this name to lookup, I can name it anything I want. I just want to name it that. And let's reload to clear the page because just all sorts of craziness happened already. So if I reload, now if I put in a name like, I don't know, Joe, when I hit get profile, look what happens down the console. It prints out Joe, right? If I put out smiley faces, I hit get profile, smiley faces, send out hello, smiley face, get profile, and you get the point down there, right? So the idea behind this is that now we've attached this button click to grab this value out and to actually print it to the console. Questions on that so far? So once we have the variable, we can actually now do something with it. So this is now the extent of what we can do if we can't go to the server, right? Because remember that, remember how this is structured here, that this is in our browser. All the JavaScript so far can only run in our browser. It can manipulate the DOM tree all at once. It can do this all day long and, you know, change text and change inputs and everything. But what we really want to do is reach the server. And the server has a database inside that contains, it contains 3 people right now. So it contains me, John, Jane. It contains 3 of our data, and it contains 3 rows with our data. What we really want to do is we want this JavaScript to make a call to the server to grab stuff out of the database and to bring it back to the JavaScript, right? Because that's what the AJAX interaction is. In order to do that, in order to actually do this, we need to use this AJAX technique. So that's what we're going to attempt to do next. To recall what the database was, so this was from lecture 4, I think. So this database is, if you actually look at the lecture 4 code, the starter code here, the database is CGI bin and lecture 4 create database. So in lecture 4, we created a SQLite database, and this database just had 3 users, and it had a table called users. So this has a table called users in the database, and I inserted these 3 sets of values. So name, age, and profile image, whatever. So that's in our database. So imagine the database was giant. It has 10 million users or something. We basically want to look up the name in the database and then grab all the information and pass it back to the browser so it can render all the stuff. So I've already created the database from a previous lecture, so it's already there. So in order to do that, we need to actually write some JavaScript. So recall now we have name to lookup as a variable we can do stuff with. So the central call in jQuery to do this AJAX functionality is $.ajax. So this is a method or a function call in jQuery. So yeah, it does look a little weird because there's a $sign in front of it, but yeah, this is the syntax. So then we're going to call this, when we call this function, it will actually go to the server and fetch data for us and bring it back so the concept of AJAX actually predated jQuery by quite a bit. And there are ways of making AJAX calls without jQuery. You can actually look, different browsers do it slightly differently. But again, one of the benefits of jQuery is that it really abstracts away all of these details, and you just make a .ajax call. If you look in your readings, there's some other calls that are that are a bit more convenient, but they all basically call .ajax. So if another jQuery thing here is, if you have there are some people who propose, there's a website called You Might Not Need jQuery. You should all check it out. So this is a these are written by actually not the people who wrote jQuery, which is good because they don't have as much conflict of interest. But they basically say this is great, blah blah blah. You should be aware that ditching libraries like jQuery can easily require large amounts of research and to avoid bugs even in modern browsers. And it's because jQuery has done about, they have 10 years or more of work on trying to figure out the weird bugs in different browsers and working around that, so that when you call a function, it's like you're going to have a pretty good chance it works on most browsers. And this is you can Google this page, jQuery's browser bug workarounds. This is just a page that these people. What they did is they went through the jQuery source code itself. You don't have to know this for example, but they went through the jQuery source code and they looked for parts where the jQuery developers spent hours trying to debug some weird browser bug, and there are a ton of them. Let's see, workarounds. So Firefox 18 plus, you have to add this code. Android less than 4.1, add this weird code. Android less than 4.0, IE Internet Explorer 9 to 11. Microsoft forgot to. What does that even mean? All right, let's read that out loud. Android, Phantom.js, Android, Firefox IE 9, Opera, WebKit. These just go on, and there's no way you're going to write all this code yourself, right? So basically, the jQuery developers throughout their years and years of blood, sweat, and tears have gotten the library so that it works on all these different versions and everything. So. Yeah, it just keeps on going on. It's ridiculous. Because basically how this happened is that somebody who was using Android version 4 said, my stuff isn't working, why not? And then they looked into it and they said, oh, we need to add this line of code in to make it work on this version of Android. So if you use jQuery, you get all of these benefits that all these people have spent over a decade on, and you don't actually have to worry about it. So long story short, to do Ajax for this class, all you have to do is just do .ajax and call it. Okay, so what do we call it with? So the .ajax function takes actually only one parameter. So this is a thing in JavaScript that may be kind of weird to people. So it takes one parameter. You might think it might take a bunch of parameters, right? It should take the script name, it should take parameter, data, errors, blah, blah, blah. You think it might take a bunch of stuff, right? But it only takes one parameter in. But it just happens that one parameter is a complicated object in JavaScript. So this is another part of JavaScript that may be confusing because there's all these braces. But what this braces syntax is in JavaScript, beyond defining methods or functions, is that a set of braces actually defines what's called an object in JavaScript, a JavaScript object. And an object in JavaScript is a bunch of keys and values. So it's basically a key, colon, a value, comma, key, colon, value, comma, so on, and enclosed by one of these braces things. So this basically is just an object that has a bunch of keys and a bunch of values inside. So that's why you can just pass in one big object into the Ajax function. You don't have to pass in 30 things. Yep?
Do they have to be arranged as you have it, where all of the ending braces are after all three functions?
This part right here, which part are you referring
Yeah,
to?
all three of them are after all three functions.
Like this?
Yeah.
Right here. So this weird pyramid thing? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, do they have to be there, or can they be after each individual function?
No, they have to be in this order. It's called, actually, if you're what is this called in again, more so a tangent. They call this the Pyramid of Doom. I think it's called this. Yeah. Oh, this is a good Street Fighter thing. Yeah. So this is what they call it. Where's the picture? Yeah. So if you write code, it gets to really nested. In JavaScript, where is the JavaScript style trap? Yeah. So you're gonna see code like this a lot. So yeah. So that's a really common pattern. There are ways to avoid it with different libraries we won't talk about in this class. But if it aggravates you to stare at this, come talk to me afterwards and I tell you about other ways to do it. But yeah, this is pretty common. You have to have it in that order. You don't have to indent it, but usually people do. So you can make it in a nice pyramid of doom. You can draw fireballs and stuff. But yeah, this is unfortunately very common when you're writing JavaScript code. There's actually not that many layers. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to pass in an object, and this object has all the parameters that the function expects. So there's a lot of them. You don't have to memorize them, but you just have to kind of glance what they are. So the URL is cgi bin lecture7.py. Data, again, this is another one of these things. Type get data type text success function. I'll just write all these skeletons first. Error. Error. Don't actually write this in your code, but this should be it. Okay, so what just happened here? There's a lot of stuff just went on. I'm gonna try to fit it all on one page because this is starting to look kind of confusing. But okay, so this all fits on one page, more or less. So let's actually parse out all the braces because it looks kind of confusing. So this is just a method name. This is the call. This parentheses is the call, and it ends right here. So everything inside. So we're going to call this method. Inside here, there is one big brace out here and one big brace out here. So these braces enclose this blob right here. Does that make sense where all these braces are? So you have to be able to debug this if you don't have your braces right. So this is why it's important to get them right. So that is one thing. And this thing is called an object in JavaScript, a JS or a JavaScript object. So what this object has, it has a bunch of keys. One is called URL colon, one's called data colon, one's called type colon, data type success error. Now each one maps to a value. So URL maps to a string. Data maps to, what is data mapping to right now? Another object, good. It's empty right now, but it's another object. Yes, there's an object within an object. What is type? That's it's just a string get. Data type is text. Success, what is success assigned to? Yeah?
It's a function that will be called when the request is successful.
That's right. So it's a function that will be called when the call is successful. And then same thing with error, right? It's a function that will be called. So the idea is both success and error are assigned to functions. And with the question earlier, these are not run when you run this code. Right? These are only run later when you get a success or you get an error. So it's run later at some weird point in the future. It may never be run if you never make that call. So if you do JavaScript, you have to kind of get used to this kind of nested structure. We could break all these out. Again, we could imagine breaking these out into variables and stuff, and they'll just take more room. And then you just have to kind of follow more. So a lot of times, things are just written as compactly as possible, even though it is a little hard to read. So if you've worked with other languages like Python or Java or so, these objects are sometimes called, they're called dictionaries in Python. They're called hashes or hash tables, or maps, or hash maps, or dictionary maps. No, there's no dictionary maps. They're called some of these other things in other languages, right? But conceptually the same thing. It's you have a bunch of keys and you have a bunch of values. And what you can do is you can look up a key and get its value. And we put it all in one place. In JavaScript, it's just called an object. Okay, so how did I know what to write in here? I knew what to write in here because that's the jQuery documentation. It said that the AJAX function expects one parameter as this, and the parameter expects is this big monolithic object with these keys and values. If you don't put them in right, the jQuery function will throw up its hands and fail in some way. So you have to write these pretty much exactly right. Okay, so if we read this, what is this telling us? If we read this, this is saying that, now I'm going to take away the scaffolding. It's saying that we want to make some call, and the call we want to make to the server is at this URL. So we want to call, we're going to look up this URL on the server, and then we want to do something with it. The thing we want to do is we want to do a GET request, just like how we did in the first part of the class. And we're going to send some data to the server here. And we're going to get some data back that's just in plain text. And if things work out, we're going to run this function. If there's an error for some reason, we're going to run this function. So there's a lot here, but we're going to go over all of it. So first of all, what is the data? Oops. First of all, what should we pass in as the data to this thing? What are we trying to pass? We're going to try to send to the server. Good, the name to look up. Well, this is an easy one because there's only one thing you could do. Yeah. So you want to pass in the name because the whole point of going to the server is you want to ask, hey, my name is Philip or John or Jane. Give me some information. So the server needs to know who you're asking about. So I named it. What I've kind of have a habit of naming these all different things. these names just look really different. You can use your own style as you like. The reason why I have all these named to look up requested underscore name is that I want to show that they're not, they can be completely different names. And it's often confusing when people name everything the same thing, like X, or name, or I, then you don't know which is what. But recall that requested name is the key, and the value is whatever I pass in. So this could be Philip or John or smiley face or sad face or whatever. This is just a string. So when we set up this code, what we're essentially doing is the following. So if I click this, so remember this all exists within the click handler of the lookup button. So when I click the lookup button, so I'm going to attempt to draw this now. So there is a web browser here. There's a box. Okay, so it says name. There's a box, and there's a button right here, right? And we'll say type in Philip in the box. There's a server here. We're really crammed on space. When I click this button, this piece of JavaScript code behind this drawing will run. What it'll do is that it will make a request to CGI bin lecture7.py, lecture7.py, and it will send the data of requested name. There's no room here, but requested name equals Philip. It'll send all this. It'll basically grab this, send it to the server, and the server can do whatever it wants with it. So it doesn't have to do anything. It can do whatever it wants with it, and then the server will do something and send the data back, send whatever data it wants back, and once the data gets back here, this success function, if all goes well, will run. So questions at this point? Yes.
Do we have to specify where the data is located?
Sorry.
Do we have to specify where the data is located?
Yeah. So well, you have to specify what script you want to run, but not where the data is located, right? So the thing you specify here is lecture7.py. You have to specify that. Otherwise, you don't know where you want to go.
But how does it know what to look up?
Good.
How to look it up in the
That's right. So
database?
the question is, how does it know what to look up in the database? Like this code, you're absolutely right. This code has no idea about the database, right? I didn't write any SQL in here. I didn't write anything in here. So how does it know what's looking in the database? And the answer is it doesn't actually need to know. So your JavaScript, it only needs to write that, and we're going to write code on the server that does what you want. So that's actually the very next step. So we need to actually, this code here needs to know about the database. Right, this code here needs to know about our database, and that's the next part we're going to. That's a great point. The JavaScript doesn't need to know what's behind it. So it's just like how when you make a call to when you're in Google Maps and you're scrolling around, the Google Maps JavaScript doesn't know what the database or the password or anything is. Yeah?
Does the JavaScript at least need to know what data it's getting?
The JavaScript needs to know, one, the URL, right? You have to know the URL because it's like, what are you sending this request to? It needs to know what data you're going to send to the server. And then it needs to know, the last thing you need to know is it needs to know the format of the data it's getting back. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So that is, if you have amazing 3D vision, it's this right here. So data type : string text means that I'm expecting back just a blob of text. And I can process text however I like. Do you have a question?
What if we have the name as 30 instead of 50? Because it will still work.
If I pass name as 30? Okay, so then if I put in 30, it will run the script and it'll just say 30. Oh, because all of these are actually converted to strings when it's passed to the URL. So you can just call it with anything. You can call it with.
Database can return the same information because 50 and 30 the age.
Not necessarily, because we want to, in the database, we're going to do a query for the name only. We're only going to match names. We're not going to match ages. So we're going to do that in the database code. Yep.
Can data type be multiple data types?
Good. Can data types be multiple data types, right? So you're kind of already foreseeing that text may not be the best way to return stuff, right? So hang on for 10 minutes and you'll see what to do when things are more complicated. But right now we're just assuming it's just returning plain text, because text is the simplest thing it can return. Okay, so now we have to actually go to the server. So in our messy drawing here, let's go from the JavaScript world to the server world. So I'm going to erase this picture. Okay, so now we're going to go to the server world. Unfortunately, all this is already written. So this is a standard Python CGI script like you've seen 1,000 times before in the class. What this script says is that we're going to take requested underscore name from the get parameter. So remember, this is spelled requested underscore name. I spelled it the same way in the JavaScript too. We're going to take this. We're going to connect to the people database. We're going to print the HTTP header back because we need to print some header. We're going to actually execute this statement. So this is, if you squint hard enough, this is saying select everything from users where name equals question mark, and we're going to pass in the name in there. So this is your question of, if you put in 30, you can't find anything because there's no name with 30. There's an age with 30, right? So there's only 3 possibilities: Philip, John, and Jane. If you look up anything else, it will actually just it won't print anything. So you should probably put some error code in. So then this should only return one thing if it finds it. And then the thing it returns is you're going to grab the first, second, and third columns out, and we're just going to print them out: name, space, convert H to string, space, and image. Okay, so we're just going to print all this stuff out. This is the only thing it's doing. So recall that this lecture7py, I can actually visit it now with a URL. So lecture7py is here. Okay, so what happens if I just run lecture7py with no parameters? I just run it. It gives you an error. And how come there's an error? Well, there's like 5 people talking. How come there's an error? Yeah.
There's no name to pass into the database.
That's right. There's nothing to pass in the database. It actually does it break earlier than that? Yeah, it actually breaks earlier than the database. It breaks up here because it's trying. I mean, you're essentially right, but it breaks before the database, right? The first line of code tries to look up requested underscore name from the form or from the URL, and it can't find it, so it just crashes. So it's really good to have this. If you're going to do your project in Python, it's good to have these 2 lines in, because if you have these 2 lines in, it'll actually print out a nice error message here to your home to your web page. If you do it using other languages, there's other ways to do this. If I don't have this line, it's super annoying, because if I don't have this line in, it just gives me that. It's like the worst message you can possibly get. Because if I see that, I have no idea how to debug, right? It's like, what just went wrong? I have no idea. Did I change all my permissions to world readable and executable? Like, just copy everything again, rename it. So it's very important to have this, because if you have this, error messages turn into something more sane. So we need to pass in requested name. So to do that, we just pass in requested name equals Philip. So what should this do now that I have the requested name as Philip? So what should I see on my screen now, given this code? Yep. Yeah, it just prints out the image as the image. Yeah, it shouldn't be called image. It should be called image file name or something. Yeah, it should just print out. It should look up myself in the database and print out my information, which it does, right? I mean, it's not zoomed in, but if you look up, there's my name, space 30 space the cat picture, the cat file name, and then John is that, and then Jane is that. So there's no AJAX going on here, right? I'm just going to a script. This is Web 1.0. Right? I'm going to a URL, and I'm getting data, and I'm getting back a terrible looking web page. I mean, it's just a piece of plain text. So why is there a dot dot? Why do we put the dot dot in front of the file names? Yeah, it has to go up one directory. And the reason why is because everything here is in CGI bin, and all of the images are hosted one directory outward. So that's just a technicality. But the idea here is that we can grab anything out of the database now. So if I want to be more fancy for some weird reason, I can put pluses or something. And then it should print out all the pluses, right? Just looks up this. Most likely what I might want to do is maybe print one of these things out, maybe? Because then what I can do is I can grab that data and I can like parse it more easily, right? I can separate the Philip from the thing. But this will go down the same path we had the database lecture. What if you have a vertical character in your stuff? So let's just stick with this for now. So now we know that when you go visit this URL with requested name, it'll just give you back this as plain text. It'll just give it back to you. Yes?
Can you bring out the image rather than this?
Sorry?
Can you just bring out the image?
Can I just print out the image? No, I cannot print out the image because, well, first of all, so I'm just printing out just the file name, right? And if you make a whole HTML web page with whatever, that's right, and then image, whatever, Yeah, you can print out the whole image and it'll display on your webpage. That's like lecture 3 or whatever. You can do that. But for right now, what we're going to do is we just want to print the text. And I'll show you why in a sec. But you can print whatever you want. So this is just plain text. It's coming to our browser. And just to show again that nothing is being hidden from you, I'm copying this URL. And I'm going back to all our favorite web browsers, Curl. Everybody's all-time favorite web browser to use. And we're going to paste this. And this will give me the header, which is the HTTP header. And then it literally just gives me this string of text, right? There's no HTML, there's no anything. So the thing I want to show you here is that, let's do Jane. Jane has the bear picture, and John has the whatever, the dog picture. All the requests, the responses from the server is beyond the header is just a single line of text. There's nothing else. There's nothing else there. There's no HTML. There's no images. There's nothing else. So why we want to do this? We want to do this because we want to actually give that text back to the JavaScript. So now in our picture here, we have JavaScript code. Make a request for lecture 7 py question mark requested name Philip. Now this code is Python, goes to the SQLite database, fetches the Philip stuff, and then prints out or returns this string right here. It returns Philip, blah, 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 the user. So does that answer your question about how it gets to the database? Right, so the Python code needs to go to the database and look up the right thing. So this all happens on the server. So your JavaScript goes to the server, goes to Python. Python goes to SQLite, which is the database. That goes back to the Python, I guess. And the Python wraps it up and prints out a string back. And now we're on the final phase here, back to the JavaScript. All right, so we've made the round trip. We're going to go back to the JavaScript. And that's where your success function comes in. Right, so if everything works out well, this data is going to be pushed back to the JavaScript code, and the Ajax code knows to run the success function if everything went well. If something went wrong, it runs the error function. So I'm going to erase this and go to the success function, which is here. So first it's blank. So let's just, actually this success takes in, I'll call it DAT, data. So the function, I actually didn't write the whole thing. The function should take one argument, and that argument is the data you've sent back. So that's the data that's being sent back over the internet. So let's just console log it. Let's console log yay success, and then console log DAT, which is the data. So this data is being passed here. So who calls this function? Do you call it? So what code calls this function? So the jQuery library itself calls this function, right? The library itself calls it. And when is this function called?
When the database returns I guess when the server returns the data.
Yeah, so when the server returns the response back to the browser. So the server returns everything back to the browser, and that is saved as this dat variable, and the JavaScript runs then, right? So yeah.
So I see that the type is get and the URL. In the URL, you're not specifying the variable.
Right.
That method.
Yeah.
So what would happen if you include after py
the question mark
and
yeah.
the variable?
Right. So you're saying I'm not specifying requested name, right?
Because you're using the get type.
Yeah. I should say requested name equals Philip or whatever, right? Because actually, that's a great point. Because if you look at the URLs I've been using in my curl example, all the URLs have CGI bin lecture 7, and I have this question mark, right? Because I'm saying I want to get requested name John, I want to get requested name whatever. So, but I'm not saying that in my code. So where is this actually appearing in my code? Where is the requested name appearing in the code? Yeah, it's right here. That is the thing after the question mark. So instead of putting it in the string itself, you actually put it as a separate data parameter. So that makes it a little nicer because then you can just use variables and everything. Otherwise, you have to construct the string. So yeah, so that's absolutely right though. It needs to actually construct that string. And the jQuery Ajax library takes your data and makes it into that big long string to send in. Good. So then when it finishes and it comes back, this code is executed. Now, this is the A part in Ajax. So what does the A stand for in Ajax? Asynchronous. Okay, so asynchronous, this is the A part in AJAX. That's super, super important. The A part in AJAX is if you do this, okay, let's say I click the button, right? When I click the button, it goes to the server. Well, let me super tired of this picture by now. When I click the button, some data, the button gets clicked, yay, it goes to the server. Now, does it wait until the server does everything and goes back before it runs more JavaScript? Right, it doesn't, because if so the asynchronous means that as soon as I go to the server, my script just keeps on running. And let's say the server takes, I don't know, 30 seconds to do its job because it's really slow or it's looking through a big database. If we didn't have this and we just made a regular function call to the server, what would happen is that my whole page would just freeze for 30 seconds. Because I make a call, because remember how a normal function call works is, make a function call. If that function call does something or does something to the server, you have to wait. And then the function call returns and finishes. So that's clearly not desirable because if you're in your web browser, you don't want your browser to stall for 30 seconds. So the A part of AJAX means asynchronous, which means that when you make this call, your page just keeps on doing stuff as normal, and it knows to call the success function after right here when things come back. So if the question is, when does the success function get run? After 1 second, after 5 seconds? We don't know. Depends on how long the server takes. It could run after a minute if the server takes a minute. It could run after half a second. We actually don't know when this code runs relative to the other code. But the important thing is it doesn't just stop here and wait for the AJAX to complete. And that's how your web apps can be responsive, right? Conceptually, if you make some request server, you want to keep on letting the user interact with the page. You don't want to stall it until the server's done, because what if you have a really slow connection or your server's really slow? Okay, so let's get into the success function here. So what this does is it just prints out yay success and prints out the data. So let's see if we actually have a successful run. If there's an error, it'll print out this alert, this annoying alert. So let's save it and hope for the best. We are here. Okay. So I'm going to put in Philip here, and I'm going to do get profile. And then it says yay success, and then it prints out this data here. All right. So if I put in John, get profile, it says yay success and print out John. Can I slow this down? No, I can't slow it. And Jane does the same thing. So notice how this data is coming from the server now, right? I mean, it's not displaying to your screen, but this is actually coming from the server, and our page has not reloaded at all. So we've made a full round trip with that. And if I put in something invalid, it should give an error. Let's do smiley face. Oh wait, it still says it says. I guess it printed out. Well, it printed out nothing, right? It just looked up nothing in the database. So it's kind of annoying. So you have to have better error handling code. Okay, so in the last 5 minutes, so what you can imagine doing now is that DAT is you own the DAT variable right here, right? So you can do whatever you want with this. So what's the first thing you probably want to do with it in order to put it on the web page? Yep. That's right. That's right. You want to split it because you want to get the name, split it by the character, the thing, and then once you split it, you can imagine doing the regular JavaScript from last lecture, which we did, this thing, and then you're going to use a regular JavaScript to plop the image and the names on. All right. So so basically what you have to do is you have to parse the data yourself, right? You have to parse the data. So you can imagine this gets kind of annoying when you have a lot of data, right? And this is the same problem as what if someone's name happens to have a pipe thingy in it? What if someone's name happens to have quotes or stuff? So this is getting back to somebody's question about the data types. So it turns out plain text is probably not the best thing to do, even though we use this right now because it's the simplest way to illustrate. Remember, plain text is just, I am just returning text to you. There's nothing, there's no funny business going on. The way to do this that's done in modern web apps is not data type text. Instead, I'm just going to comment this out, is data type. It's called JSON. So how many of you have heard of this term JSON before? Good, most of you have heard of it. Good. So this is the first time we've seen this class. So JSON is a structured data format that is just a string, but it basically looks, and if you squint hard, it actually looks like these JavaScript objects. In fact, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So it looks almost like JavaScript objects. So what you want to do now is you want to, let me just copy and paste in the code since I'm short on time. But basically what you want to do what you want to do is instead of, actually I just print it out. I just write it. What you want to do is instead of printing out the text, we want to just wrap it in an object and print it in JSON. So to do this, you have a library called import JSON. Data equals, this is an empty dictionary in Python. So what we're going to do is we're going to just fill it with, so we're going to comment out this code. And we're just going to say data, my name equals name, data, my age equals age, data, my image equals image. This assigns basically these three things to this dictionary in Python. And then the final piece here is you're going to print JSON dump string data. This is a magical function in Python that takes a data structure in Python and converts it to a JSON format. And then we're just going to print it back as a response. So if we do that, I want to show you what exactly it looks like. If we do that, what will happen is if I visit lecture7.py, request name Philip, notice how before we print out that's plain text, right, with the vertical characters. If I do that, it actually prints out, this is a piece of JSON data. If you look at it hard enough, it says my age colon 30, my image colon whatever, my name colon Philip. So this data, and if we say John, it will print out the John stuff, and Jane, print out the Jane stuff. So this now you don't have to parse yourself because the JavaScript knows how to parse it. So the key here is once we do this, when we go back here and we say the data type is JSON, then what we can do is that the console log, this data is now a piece of a JavaScript object. So when I save it, when I do the exact same thing, what just happened? When I do the exact same thing here, when I reload the page, recall before it was just printing out a string. There's an error. When I print out, notice how this actually prints out a beautiful, nice JavaScript object, my age, my name, whatever. And the cool thing here now, so just to show you, there's John, the same thing. The cool thing now is now I can say console log dat my name, console log dat my age, and console log dat my image. So now we can actually access all the fields without having to, like you suggested, parse out the strings and everything. It's all there for us because it's a JSON object. So if I do that, and I say Philip, we have one more minute. I say Philip, it actually prints out, yay, success. That's my name, that's my age, that's the cat picture. And for the final piece that I'm going to write in, we're actually gonna update the HTML. So the final piece here is we're just gonna say, we're gonna select name div, and we're going to call the HTML method, which overrides the HTML. My name is data, dat my name. Copy, paste. And let's see, we're almost there. My age. So my age is my age. And the final piece is profile image dot attribute source, comma, dat, my image. So what I'm doing is I'm taking those variables and I'm setting the HTMLs, and if I do everything right without misspelling it, everything is right without misspell, let's see what happens if it works the first time. And there we go, right? And there's John here, and Jane here. So this, notice the URL stays exactly the same. This is the Web 2.0 AJAX interaction. We've grabbed everything in the database, plopped it back in the HTML, and we have not reloaded the web page at all. So for next time, remember, no class on Thursday, study for your exams.